Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and all the audiences gathered at this forum. Thank you all for coming to this important forum to discuss about the role of the financial sector in our energy future against the background of the 3.311 Fukushima nuclear power plant accident of 2011, one of the worst nuclear power catastrophe in history. Today, we live in a world where 1.3 billion people, almost 20% of world population, still lacks access to reliable electricity, and 2.7 billion people relying on traditional biomass for their cooking use. On the other hand, the global GDP grew by 75% during 1992 to 2010, and the rate of population in absolute poverty has decreased to 27% in 2005 compared to 46% in 1992. The driver for this growth has been China and India and other emerging new economies in the developing world. This may sound like good news, but actually per capita income difference between rich and poor countries has grown bigger, and the average income of the richest 10% of the population is now about 9 times that of the poorest 10%. The increase of hunger shows this very clearly. The number of undernourished people in developing countries increased by about 20 million between 2000 and 2008, even though enough food to feed all people is produced globally. This is same with energy. Though these emerging economies use a lot of energy, they are for industrial purposes, mainly in industry, transport, and urban areas. These uses have been growing rapidly in low and middle income economies, but high income economies still use almost 5 times as much energy on a per capita basis. Thus, the growing use of energy does not reach to the very poor who desperately need basic energy. When the emerging economies use as energy sources are mainly coal, oil, and big hydro, and many countries are trying to introduce nuclear as well. But all these are huge and expensive centralized systems that destroys the environment and all the natural capital that we all depend on. As we have seen in the Green Revolution in agriculture, that huge centralized system of growing crops did not solve the problem of hunger. It is same with energy. The danger is that these countries desperately in need of energy are in many cases rich in natural resources, which are diminishing at an alarming speed. The introduction of such centralized energy system may lead to accelerated loss of natural resources and biodiversity globally. What we need to recognize now, post-Fukushima, is that the most reliable and resilient form of energy system is a decentralized small system using local natural resources that does not destroy the environment and those that reaches out to the people who really need energy access. Today, we gathered to discuss what energy system the financial sector should invest in for a bright and hopeful energy future after looking into the real devastating and irreversible impacts of Fukushima nuclear power plant accident, not only to the local, but to all the Japanese people, and present them as food for thought. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Yurika Ayukawa. I am teaching at a university in Chiba Prefecture. First, we'll have Dr. Masafumi Yokemoto of Osaka City University to review the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident from the cost and compensation perspective. Dr. Yokemoto, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Yokemoto, and I will present my paper on review of the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident hereafter in Japanese. じゃあすみません、通訳の方よろしくお願いします。
So in English, in Japanese from now on. So today, I would like to make a presentation based upon this title, and look at the cost issue of the Fukushima fiasco. So I think there are 5 points, 5 bullets that I would like to make. And in particular, for those who have come from overseas, let me provide you with an overview of the accident. And second, concerning the various costs incurred by the accident. And thirdly, what are the costs for evacuating the citizens in the area? And fourthly, who bears the cost? Who foots the bill for the compensation? And related to that, how should the nuclear power cost estimation change after Fukushima? Many of you may know this. Citizens in this area were evacuated after the accident. First, the 20-kilometer radius. Some parts the citizens can return to, and so there is a no-go zone, and the evacuation was ordered to the citizens. And concerning the 30-kilometer radius, it's a bit ambiguous. There's an emergency zone, and although the evacuation is not mandatory, there are many citizens who have voluntarily evacuated, and the plume flew to the northwest. So, for example, Itate village is within this 30-kilometer radius. This is the overview of the accident. What are the impacts of the accident? Environmental, social, economic. And what were the ripple effects there? First and foremost, there was the radioactive pollution, as you see here, and radioactivity polluted the air, the seas, soils, and after that, the drinking water and the foodstuffs. And next, there was, of course, the impact on the workers in the nuclear power plants. They were exposed to quite a substantial level of radiation, and were fearful of the health effects here as well. And if we take the comments of the government, so there is no immediate health effect, is the position taken by the Japanese government. And as the citizens were evacuated, that's the reason. But there is the impact on the health of the inhabitants due to evacuation as well. And of course, there might not be immediate health effects, but of course there could be chronic, long-term effect on the health of the inhabitants. And of course, there has been economic losses incurred. Of course, on the goods and commodities, the asset value of the housing, land has been impaired. People have lost their earnings, or the profits of the companies. And of course, there has been an increase in the expenditure. Not only the social cost, but of course there is the financial burden, a heavier burden on TEPCO itself. So this will be the overview of the various impacts of the Fukushima accident. And from what I have mentioned, what are the type of costs that have been incurred due to the accident? And I would like to sort of categorize the various costs. First would be the accident convergence and decommissioning cost of the Fukushima nuclear power units 1 to 4. And secondly, the compensation to the damage and reconstruction and recovery costs would be the second. And thirdly would be the related, entailed in this, would be the administrative, the legal costs. And I think this might quite be inflated in the future. I don't think this will be a small amount. First of all, then, let me look at the costs incurred by the accident in terms of conversions for the accident and the decommissioning of the nuclear power plants. The most conservative estimate is that it will take take 1 trillion yen or more, as calculated by TEPCO Management and Finance Investigation Committee. So a government committee has come out and added some more numbers and costs to this, and this is the number that they've come out. But some people are saying that this is much too low a figure for the accidents, convergence, and the decommissioning. So 20 trillion yen is one number that's been floated. This would include the debris disposal as well. So this is a specialist from GE. Mr. Gunderson is from GE, a specialist working at GE, or who worked at GE. Next is the compensation costs and the reconstruction. So there is, of course, compensation and recovery. If we first look at the compensation amount, this again, this is a rather conservative number. 6 trillion yen is minimum, I would guess. So that's one number that's been floated around. And once again, things might develop and more numbers might be added to this. And amongst the reconstruction and recovery, we have first the soil decontamination costs, and also there has to be an interim storage facility built, which might become the permanent storage facility in a not too distant future. So in order to decontaminate the soil, the various costs are incurred. The government, particularly the Ministry of Environment, has allocated a budget that's about 1 trillion yen. And in addition, a big number has been floated. 28 trillion yen has been calculated by specialists. It all depends on what other facilities are constructed. And all of the debris has to be stored somewhere, and 80 trillion yen has been floated by this newspaper, as reported in this newspaper. And then the third classification of costs would be administrative and legal and transaction costs. If we pick up just what's on the government budget, that's 900 billion yen. So the Ministry of Environment is saying that 700 billion yen overlaps with the soil decontamination costs. So this is what appears in the government budget, but there will be the budget of the municipalities would have to be added on to this final account. So I just mentioned a couple of estimations and numbers for you, but it is important is that the total cost is uncertain. We cannot say for certain what the total cost will be, because the compensation is not yet defined clearly. And the question becomes, to what extent the government or the TEPCO would compensate the damages. So depending on how that is decided, then the total sum of the costs would change. And so therefore, the situation is extremely fluid concerning the total sum of all these costs. Next, let me look at the evacuation and also the compensation to those who have evacuated. The total number of evacuees within Fukushima alone is 160,000, and there is just about 100,000 people who have evacuated within Fukushima, and 60,000 people who have left the prefecture and moved elsewhere. So this is I divided the evacuees based upon destination. And then let me look at why those people evacuated. There's about 111,000 people who evacuated from Fukushima because they were told that this was a mandatory evacuation. And there's about 50,000 or over 50,000 people who voluntarily left their own homes. And there are other voluntary evacuees from other prefectures, because they were told that their particular location was a hotspot. And also, we don't really know the total number of such voluntary evacuees. If we look at the situation of the evacuees, they have suffered quite a lot of psychological impact. That is to say, first, needless to say, these citizens have been forced to evacuate, and they would be the psychological pain, impact due to that. They had to go to a certain sort of evacuation facility with lots of other people without privacy, and with the extension of the time frame of the evacuation, they do suffer from feelings of uncertainty, let's say from 6 months onwards, as to how long this situation is going to continue. And I think many of the evacuees right now feel that they would never be able to go back home. So there is the psychological pain from losing their hometown. So these are some pictures from Iitate village, which was a farming village. And the cattle, the cows in particular, were lost, had to be disposed of. And this is the farm, dairy farm, where you see none of the cows that used to be there. And you see on the left-hand side the award that was given to the Holsteins that this farmer in Iitate was farming. Now, what sort of damage has yet to be compensated? Mainly, it is the compensation for the voluntary evacuees. So an interim guideline was announced by the government, and this did not take into account the compensation for the voluntary evacuees. And there has been many campaigns, and many in the audience may be involved in those campaigns to provide compensation for the evacuees who voluntarily moved out. So I think more and more there will be a discussion of this, and perhaps this will increase the total cost of compensation and reconstruction. Then who is going to foot the bill? And I will be very brief here. TEPCO is dispersing, but in fact that has been there has been the supplementation by the government on all of the money and funds that has been dispersed by TEPCO as compensation for damages for the evacuees and others and victims as well. So this is in effect taxpayer money being paid into TEPCO. And TEPCO is not obliged to repay the grants that it is receiving in order to provide the compensation. And the only way that TEPCO will recoup this would be the electricity charges, or the increase in the electricity charges. And the last point is that right now the total cost is increasing. And this, for the cost estimation of nuclear power generation, must be changed. And back in 2011, it was calculated by the government that it takes 5.9 yen per kilowatt hour to carry out nuclear power generation, which has at least increased to 8.9 yen per kilowatt hour in 2011. So this is based upon the very conservative estimation of the damage. So therefore, if there is an increase in damages by 1 trillion yen, then it will mean that there will be an increase in the kWh cost by 0.1 yen. So there is no decommissioning cost included behind this 8.9 yen per kilowatt hour. And also the interim depositories construction cost is not included. So therefore, I think the generation cost increase might be even a yen or so. So nuclear power generation is facing this question of this dramatic increase in cost. And so it all depends on what is the total damage and total compensation cost for the Fukushima accident. So I have been brief, but thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Yokemoto. Next, we will have Mr. Beranek from Greenpeace International, who authored the report Toxic Assets, Nuclear Reactors in the 21st Century, to talk about the risks of investment in nuclear industry and opportunities for investment in fast-growing renewable energy sector. Mr. Beranek, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank also the Takagi Fund for organizing the event and for inviting me. And thanks everyone for coming today for the seminar. My focus, as has been said, will be on what are the implications of Fukushima accident and what should be the lessons for the finance industry. But before I go there, I would also like to quickly capture what actually has happened, because this is the substance of the whole follow-up events and implications. One of the things that we are observing, and I actually came this morning from Fukushima, where we are doing some field work with a team of Greenpeace radiation experts as one of the series of field missions, is the very large-scale contamination that goes really well beyond the 20-kilometer or 30-kilometer radius of the evacuation zone. But as you can see on the map, actually significant contamination, where the levels are twice or 3 times higher than is the natural background, even reach down to Tokyo. And we have to keep in mind that this still was actually quite lucky situation, because there was a plausible possibility that the release of radiation would be significantly higher. There was, as you probably know, even consideration at one point to evacuate the capital of Japan, Tokyo itself. As a result of the contamination, as we see it now, it of course impacts people and communities. And as my predecessor mentioned, more than 100,000 people actually have been evacuated or forced to leave their homes, their communities. Some of them will probably not be able to return before decades pass, because again we have the historical experience of Chernobyl, and if you look at the radioisotopes that are now responsible for majority of the contamination, one of the key contributors is cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years, which means it will take 30 years before the radiation decays to half of the initial level, and it will take another 200 or 300 years before it eventually disappears, more or less. Again, as a result of that, people have not only lost the homes and the communities and the places they value, but many of them actually have lost also the livelihood, the source of income. The farmers, they have lost the land. The fishermen are not able to fish anymore and catch the seafood along the East Japanese coastline. But Of course, this human side of the story, which of course is something we have to always keep in mind, also has some implications for the industry and for the financial sector, which is the focus of my presentation. And one of the impacts of Fukushima accident is that all investors in the TEPCO utility, which at the time of accident was the 4th largest electricity utility in the world, they have basically lost everything. There was more than 90% loss of the capitalization of the company because of the accident, the need to write off the reactors, but also shoulder the massive costs of the cleanup, decommissioning of the reactors, and compensation costs. Important to know is that TEPCO, the composition of TEPCO shareholders is such that there is actually several million shareholders. There is few larger institutional shareholders such as the Nippon Life Insurance Company, there is the Tokyo municipality, but there is more than 2 million individual people from Japan who actually invested their money into the utility, and all this money basically they have lost their savings and their capital. The damage economically goes well beyond Japan and well beyond TEPCO itself. If you look at how the shares of other electricity utilities and nuclear industry have performed in the last 18 months, you can see a significant decline both of other Japanese utilities such as TEPCO or Tohoku, but also one of the key nuclear companies in the world, the French EDF or Areva, which is one of the leading suppliers of nuclear technologies and reactors globally. All their basically shares dropped significantly as a result. One important warning for the shareholders and electricity utilities generally is that when things such as a meltdown happens in one of the nuclear reactors they are running, the costs and the damages that incur many times exceed the capitalization and the asset value of the company itself. So basically, technically the company goes bust, it's not able to pay full compensations, and if there is the legislation in place, such as in Japan, that people have eligibility to come and claim compensation costs, the burden of the compensations eventually sits with the state, with the government and the taxpayers, because the companies aren't able to fund that anymore beyond a small fragment of the real costs. This is actually showing only the cost directly incurred to TEPCO, which has been mentioned is between 5.7 and 20 trillion yens. That's linked to the decommissioning and loss of assets. While actually if you incorporate also the societal costs and the damage to economy in Japan as a country, it will be by far even larger than this. As something that I've mentioned before, which is that we have a precedent situation with a similar scale or comparable scale accident that happened in 1986 in Ukraine, in Chernobyl. And even 25 years after that, the Ukrainian economy still has to spend between 5 and 7% of its GDP on the continued cleanup, restoration, and support to the citizens who have been impacted by the accident. So that's again serious warning, and shows that it's not only the immediate costs, but that the societies and economies impacted by a major nuclear meltdown will have to shoulder the costs for many decades to come. If we think about, wow, it was very bad in Chernobyl, there was bad luck in Fukushima, but perhaps it won't happen again. It needs to be clear to everyone that actually significant events and malfunctions and accidents are happening at nuclear reactors all over the world, basically on a daily basis. So in last 20 years, there have been over 700 nuclear accidents that have been internationally reported, and many of these have been very narrow misses that if one or two other things actually went wrong, it could have resulted in the same scale of meltdown and radiation release as we have observed in Ukraine and in Japan. One of the observations and lessons I always like to stress from Fukushima is that the whole paradigm of nuclear safety actually has been vanished. It has been entirely shaken because we have been told that nuclear reactors cannot explode, and we have seen actually 3 hydrogen explosions. We have been told that the Western type of reactors cannot release comparable amounts of radiation as the Soviet-designed Chernobyl reactors, but this is exactly what happened. And we have been also assured that the chance of accident is 1 in a million years, and the probability calculations actually indicate so. But if you look at the real statistics, the evidence is in such a big discrepancy against the theory, is that we actually see that one major nuclear accident has been happening every decade between 1950 and today. And there are now new reports that are actually re-evaluating and assessing the previous assumptions and conclude that actually one major accident can happen every decade, every 20 or 30 years. There are different calculations, but basically it's much, much more frequent that we have been told to believe. Oh, this is in Japanese. So this is not only a case of isolated Fukushima or Chernobyl reactors, as I've pointed out, and there are also factors that contribute to the increased chances of accidents and radiation contamination in the future. One of them is that the fleet of nuclear reactors, currently the world has 435 reactors in operation, is aging significantly, because in the last 20 years, the number of new built reactors have been very little. So we are actually moving, this is the age composition. You can see that actually the mean age of the average reactor in the world is 27 years, which is quite close to the end of the designed lifetime. And as the equipment, the reactor vessel itself are aging, the chances of a malfunction, of a rupture of the pipeline or the reactor vessel itself is increasing in time. And that's why we are scared, and there is a warning that actually we need to be prepared and anticipate that unless the policies significantly change, we'll be facing new Fukushimas in coming few decades. What is again the lesson for investors, so to say? I think if you actually evaluate what was happening, how the rating companies, how the analysts have been looking at nuclear power before Fukushima, they have been overly optimistic, and they have been overlooking many of the warning signals and problems that actually have been evident already decades before Fukushima happened, but they were turning a blind eye for their convenience. And there have been, as we can document very well, there have been long-known design weaknesses of the Fukushima GE Mark I reactor design. There have been long-known risks of tsunami waves that can exceed what TEPCO actually projected itself and was ready for. There have been serious governance issues with TEPCO company, massive cover-ups, falsification of inspections, and none of these things actually forced the investors to take a serious look at what's happening and be more cautious about their recommendations. As I've said, there is evidence. I will go through this pretty quickly just to really support the point. For example, that already in 1986, which is 26 years before Fukushima happened, the Nuclear Regulatory Committee, which is the nuclear oversight body of the United States, have been saying that actually there is a probability more than 90% that the containment will fail if there is loss of cooling, which is exactly what we have observed in Fukushima. So the weaknesses and the problems have been known, but nobody actually responded, nobody reacted. Similarly, although TEPCO and very often the nuclear proponents conveniently say, oh, it was a major disaster that came unexpectedly and nobody was able to predict such a high tsunami. In fact, many documents show that even TEPCO itself, but also Japanese universities and Japanese institutions, such as JE and EES, which is the Nuclear Safety Authority in Japan, they actually knew for many years before that a tsunami can exceed the critical height that Fukushima was built to handle. And they knew the potential consequences, but again, because they wanted to follow the short-term profits and they didn't want to invest in upgrading the power plant itself, they basically caused and contributed to the scale of the accident today. Interestingly enough, again, this shows actually the rating from Standard & Poor's of TEPCO since last 21 years. And it shows how blind entirely actually the analysts of Standard & Poor's, but also others such as Fitch, you can illustrate it on other rating agencies, have been to the malfunctions, to the scandals, to the government's issues, to various warning signs that have been entirely ignored. And TEPCO has been consistently given very high grading, AAA or AA minus. And interestingly enough, even after the accident, it took the agencies more than 2 months to actually rate TEPCO down to junk, below the investment grade at all. So they have been responding very slowly even after the accident has happened. Again, this is Japanese. I'm sorry, I put it so late. The fact that Fukushima is not unique, and things such as poor governance, warnings that have been overlooked actually are not only a problem of Japan, but are a problem of virtually any country in the world that is running nuclear reactor, can be illustrated on these slides. This one shows that the same reactor and containment design that has failed in Fukushima is still in operation at 23 nuclear reactors in the United States. There is a couple of other examples in Spain, in Switzerland, and actually in Japan itself, where the same faulty design is allowed to continue to operate even after what we have seen in Fukushima in 2011. Similarly, there is numerous reports. This one quotes the US Geological Survey report that actually shows that there is not only one power plant that is sitting on the high earthquake risk zone that can be run over by tsunami, but there is actually dozens and dozens of reactors around the world that are vulnerable to high or increased seismic risks, and many of these are actually sitting also on the coastlines. So again, Fukushima has not been so unique as we are supposedly believe. This takes me to the last angle I would like to expose today, which is that I would like to take a look at what is happening to the nuclear industry as a result of Fukushima, and what are the new challenges that the investors and everyone actually should be aware of. This graph shows a number of new reactors that have been initiated with their construction since basically 2004, and you can see that until 2011 there has been a certain increase of new investments into nuclear power, although needs to be said that actually the whole growth is because of China, which is the red color of the charts. We can also see that actually after 2011 the new orders, the new construction initiation of reactors significantly fell down, and we've seen only a couple of reactors start to be built in Pakistan, in India, in South Korea and Arab Emirates. So there is definitely at least a pause that the industry is taking. It's also important to keep in perspective when we talk about the nuclear power, whether it's possible to phase it out or not. Do we need to expand it to be able to replace fossil fuels? It's actually important to keep it in the proportion. And this is the recent statistics released by the International Energy Agency a few weeks ago that actually show that nuclear energy worldwide contributes to less than 6% of the final energy consumption. While if you actually look at the combination of the biofuels, waste, other, which includes the solar, wind, and the hydropower, the renewable energy sources already contribute more than 12%, more than double how much we are getting from nuclear power, although the reactors seem to be so big and so inevitable and crucial. Renewables are actually getting much, much bigger. That's not only the static picture. If you look at the dynamics, and this graph shows how many new capacities have been added globally on 3 technologies. Red is the nuclear, yellow is solar, and blue is wind. You can actually see that in 1990s, nuclear power was still overpacing the wind, and PV was actually non-existing at large commercial scale at all. But if you see what's happening even before Fukushima, since 2004, 2005, you can actually see that the scale of renewable energy investments is getting way beyond how much nuclear power can deliver. And this is in installed capacities in megawatts. So we can actually see that in 2011, for example, there was 80,000 megawatt of wind and PV solar power installed in the world, which is huge compared to just 4,000 of nuclear. But even if you consider the lower capacity factors of wind and PV, if you convert how much electricity they can actually generate, you can see that in one single year of 2011, so many renewables have been built that are equivalent of 18 large new nuclear reactors, which again shows the scale and possibility to replace nuclear power within a matter of few years or 1 or 2 decades. Why is this so? Is that contrary to common wisdom, the costs of renewable electricity is actually getting very low. It's getting cheaper and cheaper. This is Bloomberg's graph that shows that in 2011 already the wind power was able to generate at the cost of 5 yen per kilowatt hour, while we have seen that the nuclear power in Japan has been estimated to cost between 9 and 10 yens per kilowatt hour. So the wind actually can deliver electricity at half of the cost that the same unit of energy delivered. Similarly, the PV industry has been maturing up significantly. With the scale comes cost reductions, and we have seen that the cost of PV basically break through the magic threshold of $1 per 1 watt of peak capacity installed, which is something that was expected to happen in 2020, but we have seen that happening already in 2011. That means that also the PV, the solar power is getting competitive, and there are estimations that, for example, in Japan, already in 2015, if you install a PV panel on your house, you will be able to get cheaper electricity than how much you pay for electricity from the socket, which again anticipates possible revolution or significant shift in the paradigm of how energy is distributed and generated in the society. Next to last graph shows actually again the scale of investments in terms of money. This is how big the markets have been for new renewable energy sources. In 2011, we talk about $260 billion as a new installed capacities, the markets globally, while nuclear power was down at 15 billion. So it's a discrepancy of the factor of about 18. And last but not least, I would like to finish here, because what I'm convinced of, and this is what we actually hear more and more often, even from established financial analysts and the industry, is that we are actually at the edge of energy revolution globally, a huge transformation that we have seen happening in the past decade in the telecommunications industry, where the mobile phones entirely took over the landlines. And if you look at the graph from Germany on PV, this is actually what exactly is happening these days in case of solar PV, the photovoltaic energy. And in that sense, if you consider any investments into future, both in developed economies but also developing economies, it would be totally nonsense to try to invest massively, and we talk about billions and billions of dollars per one single reactor, invest massively in outdated technologies that are already being outcompeted by the modern flexible systems of distributed energy. And it's like as if we decide actually to build telegraph poles and landlines at the moment when we already have smartphones and 3G phones on the markets that are taking over. So I believe that this is the message to investors, that they will not ignore. If they do ignore it, they will lose money again the same way they have been losing on Fukushima. Thank you for your attention.
So reflecting what has been presented by the two speakers before, now we will start a panel discussion, starting with Mr. Takejiro Sueyoshi on my left-hand side, the special advisor to the UNEP FI, to open up the panel with a story of a new movement that is starting in the financial sector to expand the area of corporate social responsibility to cover a wider area of environmental degradation as corporate responsibility. Mr. Sueyoshi, please.
皆さんこんにちは。大川さん、丁重なご紹介ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for that introduction, Ms. Hayakawa, and good afternoon, everybody. We've been talking about nuclear power generation and what the accident, what sort of problems were caused by the accident. And so not only in Japan, but all over the world, we are facing problems due to nuclear power generation. Also, the energy issue is causing climate change. Also, there is the expansion of poverty. The social divide is growing larger. So what sort of role could the financial sector play? What is being required of the financial sector in this day and age? So let us think about nuclear power generation on one hand and the financial sector on the other. First, finance. What sort of image do you have? What is the status of bankers in the world? And how are what's the reputation of bankers around the world? So I think bankers are now troublemakers who betrayed the trust that society had to them. So the financial function abused its role and greedily took up the money that was provided to it. And so I think the bankers are looked upon people who cannot be trusted any longer. So I think all around the world, bankers, the financial sector is looked upon like that. So there is the movement to re-regulate, to strengthen the regulation of the financial sector. But let's take a step back. That is to say, so is this the real picture, the real image of the banks, the financial sector? What is the real role of the financial sector? So the financial sector, the banks take deposits based upon trust from the depositors and provide it to corporations and people who can utilize it. And so there has to be examination of a loan. And if there is a filing for a loan, then for whom does the bank look into that loan and examine that proposal? So for each, in order to protect the interest of the investors and ultimately to protect the interest of society in general. I think that's the function of the banks and the financial sector. And furthermore, finance is moving from one place to the other. The money, the funds that has been entrusted to it by society itself. So it's not just for the investors that the banks intermediate in this sector. So finance must work for society as a whole. That is, I believe, the fundamentals that we have to demand of the banks and the financial institutions now. And not only for Japan, but for the whole world. I think the finance must return to its roots and try to resolve the various problems that the global society is facing. So what are the problems that is faced by the global society? What are the headaches that it is facing? And first, we have to understand those global problems. And next, how can finance try to alleviate, promote the solution of those problems based upon the financial infrastructure available right now? So that is the role and function that finance must play. So a couple of years ago, several years ago, UNEP, the finance initiative, there was the annual plenary. And the theme back then was financing change was the theme. So 21st century, we must try to resolve and all of the problems that are being faced right now. And so that is the role that finance must play. So finance for change. So, but in order to finance change, finance must change. Was the crux of the discussion. So there is criticism of the financial sector, but in fact, the financial sector is trying to change because of the calls for change and the criticism placed upon it. So, for example, finance and environment. Back in 1992, in the Earth Summit, UNCED, I think there was this first link between the two. That is to say, finance must intermediate in this financial flow and try to provide answers to the problems faced by the global society, and particularly provide answers to the environmental issues. And the financial sector and the financial initiative of UNEP is the first answer back in the 1990s. So if we look towards the future and try to find out what sort of finance or financial setup there should be, for example, back in 2003, some financial institutions came up with the equator principle, and these were to be applied to mainly the projects that were going on in the developing countries. So for the banks, of course, these development projects in the emerging countries are, of course, a very good business for banks. But these are very profitable businesses for the banks. But in the project itself, there could be ill effect on the citizens living in that area. And if there is ill effect, then the banks would not provide funds to that particular project. So this is the first time I've heard in my career of banks not providing funds to a particular project if there were ill effect. So, and there was the responsible investment principles.
Principles for responsible investment.
Principles for responsible investment, and it's called PRI. So based upon PRI, what was being pushed forward? So for equity investment, one should not think about the profit, the return alone. I'm sure you yourselves in the audience would have some funds in equity. Why do you purchase stocks? If you buy today, maybe 6 months from now, the stock will rise, the value would rise. But you won't buy stocks in a company whose value is going to decline. So, for equity investment, you have to think about other things as well. And that is the principle of PRI. That is to say, it might be for the purpose of environment, for governance, or CSR, or for other issues. So, for terms of governance, and we have environment, ESG, and we call that the ESG issue. So, in the world of finance, I think more and more such principles have been incorporated. Just because it's going to be profitable, one does not purchase equity. So I think that sort of straightforward equation has disappeared in the world of finance. And with 3.11, the earthquake that struck northeast Japan, I think just a year ago, and Japanese financial institutions voluntarily participated in a principle that was, say, for the purpose of sustainable society, a code of conduct for the financial institutions were written up. And I personally was involved in that discussion and chaired the committee which wrote up that code of conduct. And I think these code of conduct is a wonderful document incorporating very superb norms, whether we're talking about banks, brokers, or regional financial institutions. They're all saying that in order to build a sustainable society, the financial sector must realize what its responsibility is and will make daily efforts for that purpose and announce that to society as a whole. So financial institutions are now talking about what they can do for society, for sustainable society. And it can help and support the NGOs in that local community. So I think such a code of conduct was built up in Japan. So I think this is due to the earthquake and the tsunami, and so there was just so much damage, so many victims of that, and I think that was a trigger for the bankers to rethink what they should be doing. So no bank, no financial institution can say we are working for profit and profit alone. And if there is a bank or financial institution which still thinks like that, they should be ashamed of themselves. So, of course, in the capital markets and in the financial sector, we are seeing change. So, back in 2010, the SEC all of a sudden stated that all companies who are listed in the United States must provide CO2-related information, emissions-related information. Up until the previous day, I think, SEC was saying that the disclosure, obligation for disclosure is restricted to the balance sheet and profit and loss statements and the numbers. That's it. So that was the position taken until a certain day in 2010. And in February, all of a sudden, SEC came out and said CO2 emissions numbers must also be disclosed if that company is listed in the US. And of course, in the backdrop is, of course, the severity of the climate change that we are seeing. So even the investors want to know what sort of efforts that company is making related to CO2 emissions reduction, and that is for the safety of the investment as well. So in Bloomberg, I saw that you can see all sorts of financial information, and I think Bloomberg is promoting the carbon. So the Bloomberg provides information, not only the financial information, but also the CO2 emissions of that particular company, and one can make an investment decision based upon all those numbers. For example, Toyota, there is the information relating to the CO2 emissions and also the efforts made by Toyota in order to alleviate global warming, climate change. So I think now it's possible to make investment decisions based upon not only the money side, but also the environment. There's a company called Fitch, rating agency, and it provides various information for investment purposes. So it has come out with an index. That is to say, not companies that are profitable, but we are looking at an index of companies which are making efforts in order to reduce CO2 emissions and which are also have a good business model. So perhaps if you look at the index, this will cover companies who are making efforts not only to reduce the CO2 emissions, but also do have a good business performance as well. And from April of next year, on the London Stock Exchange, LSE, all of the listed companies' CO2 emissions numbers have to be provided as an obligation. So was it several months ago in June of this year in Rio, the Rio Plus 20 conference was held, and although the result of that conference was not very promising, not very fruitful, but what I found very welcoming was the Natural Capital Initiative. That is to say, in our daily lives and in the businesses, the service that is provided by the global ecology is the reason why we are alive, we can carry out our businesses, and so as a result of the various biases in the economic development, I think we are going in the wrong direction. That is, can we continue to be provided with the services of the natural ecology, despite the fact that we are destroying the ecology itself? So we must protect the natural capital. We must make more efforts to protect and guard the natural capital that has been given to us, that the Earth is blessed with. So more of the cost of the natural capital should be reflected in the equation behind economic growth. And I think many of you in the audience and we ourselves are already making various efforts to include the cost of the natural capital. And the global economic growth is based upon the natural capital, the natural ecology. And just as with human capital or the capital used by businesses, then we should include the cost in the equation. We should try to protect that natural capital. And so when the GDP of a particular country is to be calculated, we should also calculate whether that natural capital in that particular country has increased or decreased. And for the net income of a particular company, and did then the net income generated by that company, did that impair the natural capital or did it boost the natural capital? So that's a sort of new trend that I see. Going back to the main theme of today, the Fukushima fiasco. Personally speaking, we should move towards denuclearization in Japan. Japan has experienced Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and then Fukushima. So these three tragedies were experienced by the Japanese. We should not leave even more of a fiasco and a disaster to future generation of Japanese. That's the judgment that I make. And furthermore, if we proceed with denuclearization, then it would mean that the Japanese economy could boom as well. So I think it's an opportunity, a challenge that the Japanese should take so that the Japanese economy can blossom again. So what the world economy is demanding is a change from a brown economy to a green economy. And if Japan heads towards the road for denuclearization, I'm sure you'll be able to provide the world with the technology and innovations that is required of it. So if we look at the real situation, and we cannot stop purchasing electricity from electric power company, and that electric power company is still producing electricity from nuclear power plants. And the problem is that the electric power company is doing so many things. It generates electricity from coal or oil and nuclear, and is also transmitting that electricity, distributing the electricity to the retail customer. And we cannot have this all-or-nothing discussion. No, is it no electricity or not? So what I want, what I wish, is to review, to reform the electricity infrastructure. For example, to separate, break up the transmission, distribution, and generation of electricity. So it would make it possible for the financial sector to select which sector of the electricity industry to investing in. And also, the banks have a lender's liability or responsibility. So concerning all the loans, the banks would have to examine whether or not to provide that loan to a particular borrower. And maybe the ultimate question is, can the bank make that final decision. So that lender's responsibility must be based upon the calls to it from society in general, not only its own judgment, but what is society wishing right now? What are the desires and determinations of society at this point in time? And finally, and what this is often said is that in all businesses, it's based upon a license. So more important, you are giving a license to carry out that business. So who gives that license to the banks? Maybe it's FSA, or maybe it's is it METI that provides a license to that particular business? Maybe it looks as though like that, but maybe it's the government that provides a license to a particular business. But behind that, we are there as the voters, the taxpayers. So we have to give the electric power company the social license to do their own business. Therefore, and also towards the financial institutions, a license is given to them from society in general. So society gives a license to the banks, the financial institutions, to intermediate in this business of finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tsuyoshi, for a very interesting story. Now we have a real person from the financial sector, Mr. Yoshiwara, the chairperson of Johnan Shinkin Bank, who declared a nuclear phase-out right after the 3/11 Fukushima catastrophe and actually changed their power supplier from Tokyo Electric to an independent power supplier.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry I'm not able to speak in English, so let me speak in Japanese. Thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful forum and giving me the opportunities to speak here. We are a regional bank, mainly having business in Tokyo and the vicinity, and we have a very large clientele. We are the largest of the regional bank, and today I came to speak about Fukushima. But before I go into that discussion, I'd like to reflect on some of the issues that we as a society are facing, or what do we see as a financial institution. Now, we can say that there is a financial or globalization where monies or funds are being spread all over the world. And so most institutions do have this global strategy in finances. And it may seem that we had been very successful in that globalization. However, that had been stopped by the Lehman shock that we had faced. There is the deflation issue that we are facing all over the world. So it seems that the money or funds are making a very wild run all over the world. And so how did this come about? Now, there is the danger of money, which no one has really pointed out. In other words, that some may say that if you don't earn any interest, then maybe money will be a good medium of exchange. However, I should say that money is very dangerous. So from the ages of Mesopotamia, people have always been burdened by the money because one becomes very selfish and wanting to hoard money. And one thing that we have seen from Fukushima is that this issue is not just a nuclear power plant issue, because if it were just a nuclear issue, then as we have seen, this had been a huge accident which brought about huge damages to the society. But if that were just a nuclear issue, we find that the Japanese society, Japanese government, or the industry has not been able to stop the nuclear power generation in Japan. And moreover, they are still trying to recommission the power plants, or they want to build more nuclear power plants. And now it has already been clearly indicated that there will not be any further authorization given for newly building the nuclear power plants here as of July. So there will not be any approval given to any new nuclear power plants, or there will not be any extension of the operation of the power plants. Now, in Thailand, for example, they were considering buying nuclear power technology from Japan and Russia. However, they have said that they will not put their people to any danger by introducing something so dangerous. I think that is the correct way a government should act in face of these issues. Now, we have seen that there have been so many earthquakes in Japan, and so that it will not be advisable to create any more nuclear power plants in Japan. However, there are still many voices going after the expansion of the nuclear program in Japan, and that is really the result of so much interest in having more money. But I don't think that is really a reasonable way of going. Now, it's not advisable to recommission the power plants just because we are in shortage of the electricity. But although the nuclear power plant in the TEPCO area had been restarted, they had stopped the operation of the thermal power plant. And so it does not mean that we were having a shortage of power, but they had sufficient power, and there has not been any criticism on the move of the TEPCO. And that's the reason. The reason for that being that everyone is more interested in making profits, making more money, and that is a disease that we are finding in most of the people who are in the midst of the government or midst of the industry. And so these are all of the damages that has been brought about by the fact that people are looking for more money. So it has created an illusion that it is an absolute need for money. So it is almost like a religion, and some religious sects could be very dangerous. And so there is a worship of money and found among the people, which probably has been promoted by further liberalism or individualism. And so they don't really see the danger behind that worship of money we have seen here in Japan. Now, we are a cooperative union, and the organization of cooperatives had been created in the 1840s in order for the people to be able to share more equally in the profits. And so this movement had started in the United Kingdom as a case of sound banking. And so this is a kind of a conservatism that we had been seeing in the older day Japan. And so this concept is known as sound banking. However, in the 80s and the 90s, in the globalization that we had seen, that had all been left behind. But they're saying that the market is the most important, that just the evaluations are being made based on what the market was doing. And so that was another reason why we have seen the movement of the society going towards more worshipping of money. Now, on April 1st last year, after I heard about the Fukushima accident of March 11th, at that time, even the media had regarded the discussion of a nuclear power plant as being taboo, or that most sponsors, most media thought that they could not criticize nuclear power generation because they were afraid that they will lose all their sponsors for the television programs. So only a handful of some newspapers, a handful of publications were brave enough to criticize the nuclear power. But the mainstream media had been too afraid to make that criticism, which I thought was very strange. And we, as a part of the the banking industry, from the regional banks. We had to care for our local community, because when I speak to our bankers, our customers, they all felt that we should not be pursuing more nuclear power. However, if you speak to people from the industries, especially the major corporations and also from the major media companies, they had not been forthcoming in the criticism of the nuclear power strategy. But we felt that we were here to make contributions to the society at large. It is not our duty to try to make just money, but we have to serve the community or the society. And so we have to look at these issues as an economic issue and social issue. So on April 1st, right after the Fukushima, we had issued our declaration saying that we should be conserving electricity. And so we said that by saving on power usage, that we will be able to help towards a reduction of a nuclear power plant. And we also designed some products where we will be able to have more contribution to the society. And at the same time, we decided to purchase our power not from TEPCO, but to switch to a PPS. And the proportion of power being provided by these power generator and suppliers, or the independent power suppliers, we are seeing an increase in that. And we have seen that being actually practiced in the ward of Setagaya in Tokyo, where the mayor of the city is also promoting the purchase of power not from the large utilities, but from the PPS. And the PPS had been it is true that the actual cost of offered by the PPSs are much lower, while they are generating power from the coal or any thermal and also hydro power plant. And in the days when the railroad, the national railroad, had been privatized, I had heard from Professor Kato about the privatization of the national railway, and they said that it's not only the national railway or the telecommunications company which needs to be privatized. And this professor also mentioned that the power utilities had also need to be privatized, or they should be liberalized. And so while these power utilities are still pursuing their nuclear strategy, and we have to see that we have to look for rent seeking. That was the view that had been expressed at that time. So there needs to be liberalization or deregulation in the power utilities, where it will be more possible to reflect the social cost in their activities. And what is the largest concern that we are having? Now, it's been saying that the operators or the owners of small factories are saying that if there is no nuclear power plant generation, then there would not be sufficient low-cost power for them. However, it should be made clear that it is in fact possible to provide low-cost power even without nuclear power. And what's needed here is to have a more optimization, or have more appropriate accounting, because the accounting system that is being practiced today does not reflect, for example, the decommissioning cost of the nuclear power plants, or it does not adequately reflect all of the disposal of the spent fuel, for example. Now that the cost is not reflected in the current profit and loss statements. However, if that can be rightfully and appropriately reflected, then it will be very clear that the nuclear power generation will result in a large deficit. deficits. And so that will be made very clear to the society at large. So what's important is that the actual accounting system does reflect the actual cost. And so that is something that I would like to promote.
Thank you very much. Though we don't have enough time, maybe we'd like to have some comments from both Jan and Dr. Yokemoto, like for 2 minutes.
If I may. So simply put, as Mr. Yoshiwara said, and it is said in his book, we are talking about finance as well. So the role of the financial sector is to exchange between present value and future value. And so this may lead to quite a conservative attitude towards nuclear power generation and preventing a quick change in attitude towards nuclear power. So in the financial sector, in order to change finance itself must change. So as Mr. Tsuyoshi said, I think the financial sector itself must change in order to be more helpful for society in general.
Thank you. There is more things I can say, but I would like to stick to one thing which builds on the word accounting and how the financial institutions are accounting for costs that are not obvious, for example. I actually think that we need to move even beyond that, and I think that actually when you look at the Fukushima experience, the key word is accountability, not just accounting. And I know it's not proper in Japanese culture to express anger, but I must say, when I actually look at how the people who have been evacuated, they struggle to rebuild their lives. The compensation they received are just, small fragment of the costs they need to shoulder. This really makes me angry. And I'm asking myself, how come that the nuclear industry managed to establish such a regime that actually allows them to generate massive profits over the years, not only TEPCO, but also the GE who supplied and built the reactors, the banks. TEPCO has fundraised about $60 billion for its investments in the last 10 years, and there has been about 18 large commercial banks involved. All these institutions made big piles of money. How come that nobody is now coming to the scene and says, here is money to contribute to the damages, here is my share of responsibility, because it's actually, I was the one who made profit before, and that's why I take my share of responsibility and pay some money to compensate the people. Of course, money can't return the lives of people, but they can help at least to rebuild some of their lives as they knew it before. And I think it's really important not to forget this, because as I have mentioned before, this is not only situation today, next year, this is about situations for many decades to come. And the communities need to have support, proper support from society, not only from the state, but also from those businesses who have been involved in making Fukushima happen before. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for such a great message. Now, maybe we don't have time, but maybe 1 or 2 questions from the floor. Anybody? Please come to the... yes.
新聞赤旗の
My name is Shimizu from the newspaper Akahata. And what Mr. Sueyoshi said, I said that financial institutions cannot ignore environment. And Mr. Sueyoshi also mentioned that we should go for denuclearization. However, when we look at the additional lending to TEPCO, Mitsui Sumito, for example, said that they make make it a condition for their lending that they will restart the nuclear power plant. And so we said that we should be ashamed that if the financial institutions are actually not considering those outcomes. Thank you very much for your question. And as for that, that is the same question that I have harbored myself. And this is a discussion that has resulted in some confusion in Japan because we have to look at, we cannot discuss the future issues with what is happening currently. I'm not saying that we should leave nuclear right away because it will probably require decades. We have been spending so much money for the nuclear power plant, and we cannot interrupt that immediately. But I'm thinking about the future and for the longer future. We shouldn't be thinking only about the immediate future. So we have to consider what will be the more realistic roadmap for the quitting nuclear power generation. And that is up to the specialists to discuss or to make those roadmaps. Now, we're looking at corporate financing, for example, whether they would be lending to TEPCO or others. Now, it's really the discussion here is all or nothing, but there is, or you can't deny any lending to these utilities just because you're against a nuclear power plant. So what I have asked of the financial institution is if they are going to make a decision that they have an explanation or they provide an explanation of why they are taking these steps. As Jan mentioned, there needs to be a better accountability, what their plans are for the future, or the management of the financial institutions do have the responsibility to explain to the society as to what has been the rationale behind their actions. That's what I wanted to say.
時間がないので、はい、でも you want to ask quick. ちょっと今
非常に重大な問題なので指摘しておきます。
This is a very important point. That is to say, if the there is the Kashiwase Kariha, Fukushima number 1 and number 2 would be perhaps the condition for this loan to restart the operation. That is to say, so if we talk about Japan as a whole, if a bank is going to lend to TEPCO, then if the precondition of that loan is the restart of the nuclear power plant, that is monetarism. That is just a sort of worship of money. That's just for profit only. So these are bankers who are over greedy and who are being driven by this greed for money. So I don't. We cannot. We have to criticize the banks for providing this sort of position of the banks. And as one of the trustees of the Takagi Fund, let me say.
Shanahan from Bank Information Center, but this is actually my own question. My city, Baltimore, has seen a 30% increase in coal exports from its port in the aftermath of Fukushima as countries decide to retire their nuclear power plants, and as a result of lower domestic prices in natural gas. Much of this coal comes from mountaintop removal mining, the most destructive form of coal extraction in the world, where literally mountains are blown up so that people can burn coal for electricity. At the same time, my country is planning a massive expansion of natural gas exports to East Asia, while I understand that Japan is starting to use hydraulic fracturing here. My question is this: are we really going to see a new direction towards renewable energy in Japan, or is the country just going to rely on coal and gas, particularly imports from other countries? Thank you.
This is a very difficult question, so I think, do you want to, please make it short because we have to leave now.
Well, I feel a bit strange because I'm not a Japanese person on the panel, but I would like to say that there are some reports and studies that actually show feasibility of various scenarios. The short answer to your question is it depends on the decision. It's a matter of policy decision. It's not that there is just one way forward, and Japan has several options to choose from. One of them is actually mapped on a Greenpeace report which is called Energy Revolution, which we've created 6 months after the Fukushima disaster. That actually shows how Japan can still achieve the 30% reduction of carbon emissions by 2020 while phasing out its nuclear fleet. It's technically doable, it's economically feasible, but of course it all depends on the policy decisions and political power.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very sorry that we are late. This is because of this World Bank IMF governance. We don't have time to change the whole forum. So we started late, so we are ending late. I'm very sorry, but thank you very much for all the speakers and all the audiences. We are very sorry for the next group.